Morning.
Good day, Charles. Good day, everyone. Welcome to ADEX Pixel Virtual Expo and to this one-day digital launch of British High Commissioner's Malaysian Nature Tour, an event that's held in conjunction with 2021 Super Year for Biodiversity and Climate Change, COP15 and COP26, and also in advance of the Climate Ambition Summit on 12 December 2020. So once again, welcome everyone. Herewith, before I hand over to Charles, let me just introduce to you our first session for today. And we will be launching off with the official launch of the Nature Tour. Herewith, the moderator for this session will be His Excellency Charles Hay of British High Commissioner to Malaysia. Charles, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Nora, and so sorry for cutting you off there at the start of the day. And welcome everyone. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, all who are watching this event live on the virtual ADEX platform. Thank you very much for joining us. So I'm the British High Commissioner to Malaysia. My name is Charles Hay, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone to the official launch of the British High Commission's Malaysian Nature Tours. We're going to be running these next year in the run-up to the UN Climate Change Conference, or COP26, that the UK will be hosting in Glasgow, Scotland, from the 1st to the 12th of November. So my tour across Malaysia will be showcasing Malaysia's amazing natural ecosystems and the rich biodiversity it supports. I'm going to learn about the threats these wild spaces face and the nature-based solutions being delivered by Malaysians on the ground, not only to protect these environments, but also to protect our planet from climate change. Now, this event was meant to be an official launch in an outdoors setting, but unfortunately, of course, the pandemic has derailed our plans, but only for now. Having our launch online does, however, mean a much larger audience can join, and our experience of doing webinars over the past few months is that we get participants now from literally from all over the world, which is a wonderful addition to us. So let me first of all introduce our panel for the day, and I'm really pleased to be joined this morning by an expert panel who will be representing many different sections of society that will need to come and work together if we're to successfully protect our nature and our planet for future generations. So we have Tan Sri Professor Zachary Abdul Hamid, who is a global science leader, well known to people who will be watching this webinar. He's an ambassador for nature and a government policy advisor to the Malaysian government. We have Dr. Henry Chan, a conservation director at WWF Malaysia. And WWF Malaysia are our Malaysian Nature Tour collaborators. We have David Ingram, all-important voice of business. He's Chief Procurement Officer for Unilever. And last but not least, we have Julian Teixeira from the Malaysian Youth Delegation, who's going to provide the all-important voice of Malaysian youth. Now, they're going to shortly be presenting themselves and joining me for a panel discussion. But before that, I'd like to say just a few words to set the scene for this discussion and for our nature tours. So I've been in Malaysia for nearly 2 years now. And of course, that time I've been in Malaysia falls into two parts, pre-COVID and post-COVID. But one of the reasons I was very, very keen to come to Malaysia, and one of the things that draws some 25 million tourists every year to Malaysia, is because of your country's amazing country and nature. From the millions of year-old rainforests, peat swamps and lakes and rivers, to coastal wetlands, mudflats, and of course the ocean and coral reefs, seagrass meadows and mangrove forests. It's home to some of the world's rarest and most beautiful biodiverse spaces. My family and I have already been lucky enough to holiday on the unspoiled tropical isles of Langkawi. We've seen the archipelago of crystal clear emerald waters, azure skies, lush green vegetation, and fantastic limestone and rock formations. That all sounds very poetic, but believe me, it's absolutely well deserved for those of you who've been fortunate as I have to see these places in Malaysia. I've been incredibly lucky to visit the tropical rainforests and coral reefs in Sabah in Sarawak, in Borneo, These are ecosystems with a biological richness which is literally unmatched anywhere else on Earth. I've been very fortunate to see orangutans and to see sun bears, and one of my high points, absolutely high points, was seeing a clouded leopard, which was an incredible thing. We've seen coral reefs teeming with marine life. We've seen sea turtles returning to their ancestral breeding places. So I think I've been incredibly lucky to be posted to Malaysia. And when we're allowed to travel again, there are many, many other places in Malaysia on the bucket list. There's literally no end to the biodiverse and wild places to see in Malaysia. All these places, of course, are extremely beautiful, but it goes way, way beyond just the beauty of these places, because they have an incredibly important purpose in the well-being of our planet and literally our civilization and the future of our life on Earth. So these wild spaces play a key role in mitigating the effects of climate change, and they help ecosystems and society adapt to some of the ill effects of climate change. So, for example, healthy forests and wetlands can help to increase water storage and reduce the risk of flooding. Conversely, if they die out and dry out, then they increase the risk of fire and damage and emission of greenhouse gases. Nature recovery networks, because these are, if we leave them alone and we take care of them, they're incredibly robust and they can look after themselves, and they provide species with the connectivity that they need to move around in response to a warming climate. Meanwhile, ecosystems such as the ocean, peatlands and forests, they directly reduce carbon emissions, and they can help to reverse a warming climate by acting as natural carbon sinks. Healthy ecosystems underpin global food and nutrition security. They provide livelihoods for millions, including many of the world's poorest, in countries that are highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. The transition to sustainable land use is critical because we need to raise the next 1.5 billion people out of poverty. It's also a global investment opportunity worth some £1.8 trillion annually, we think, by about 2030. At the moment, countries invest around $700 billion a year in public support to their food and agriculture sectors, but only a tiny fraction of that supports climate resilience or nature. We must ensure that our land use, our agriculture, our fisheries management adapt so that our ecosystems can continue to support people in biodiversity. Our will to protect nature will be profoundly reframed by COVID-19. Of course, we're all dealing with the immediate impacts of the pandemic, but we must also plan for the future beyond that. Future economic growth does not have to copy the high carbon and unevenly distributed model of the past. In fact, I would argue we absolutely must not follow that model. There's a huge potential to invest in greater, greener growth. For example, in the UK, we've halved the carbon intensity of our electricity system over the past decade by switching from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And we know that sustainable use of natural systems can help bring climate change under control and safeguard the planet. Malaysia, as I've already said, is an amazingly diverse place. In fact, it's the 12th most mega-diverse country in the world, home to some of the world's oldest tropical rainforests. Some of them are over 1 million years old. Malaysia also has many species that are endangered. The Malayan tiger, the Malayan tapir, the orangutan, the Borneo pygmy elephant, and the proboscis monkey are just some globally endangered and iconic species that occupy this terrestrial natural landscape. And as we look at the forests of Malaysia, we're awed by the incredible biodiversity and these living species that you have. Healthy forests and oceans are critical for sustaining life, for eliminating poverty and promoting prosperity. According to the WWF's Living Planet Index 2018, the economic value of our nature, our worldwide nature, is estimated at some 125 trillion US dollars. And when we think about the nature-based solutions, these are also helping to harness our energy needs via wind, sun, plant byproducts, wave, and tidal movements. This is the way of the future. So why is the British High Commission launching a Malaysian nature tour campaign? Well, next year is going to be a super year for biodiversity and climate change. I've already mentioned COP26, which is taking place in Glasgow. Also, we have the UN Biodiversity Conference taking place in China in May. To make these a success and to turn the corner on protecting our planet, we need to mobilize continued efforts to reduce emissions from deforestation and agricultural practices. We need to promote these nature-based solutions. We need to embark on major sustainable land use measures to improve supply chains and protect our biodiversity through both political and economic means. I'm very proud that the UK, as president of COP this year, we're leading from the front. So in September, the British Prime Minister signed the Leaders' Nature Pledge and committed the UK to protecting 30% of our land by 2030 for nature and biodiversity. Last week, my Prime Minister announced an ambitious new nationally determined contribution for the UK, and this aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 68% compared to 1990 by 2030. This is a very ambitious target, but we think it's achievable. It's the deepest cut in emissions of any major economy. And it meets the recommendations set out by experts on the UK's Independent Climate Change Committee and accelerates our path to net zero emissions by 2050. Our pathway is built on a robust analysis, a science-led approach, and it shows the importance the UK attaches to short-term action and medium-term action to limit temperature rise in line with the Paris Agreement. So what are we going to do during the nature tours? I aim to visit all the states in Malaysia to learn more about the complex natural ecosystems on land and sea that are home, as I've said, to some of the world's most precious and endangered biodiversity. I'll meet the Malaysians working to protect these wild spaces and share their stories that promote the nature-based solutions, sustainable land use, and coexistence and integrated approach to forest and marine protection. We're going to discuss the emerging land use policies which incentivize resilient and climate-smart agriculture and other developments, how we can further build sustainability arts, how we can grow better markets and improve trade in commodities. Now, Malaysia has pledged to maintain at least 50% of forest cover in perpetuity, and that pledge was made as far back as 1992, which was a remarkable undertaking to give. At that time, Malaysia was one of the few pioneer countries to stand up at the Earth Summit, and that was at a period when the Malaysian economy was booming exponentially and pressure to use land for other uses was extreme. So making that pledge was a brave thing to do and the right thing to do, and Malaysia has stood by ever since. Through our Malaysian Nature Tours campaign, the British High Commission will provide a platform in the run-up to COP26 and beyond to share Malaysia's success stories. I've already talked about the enormous sums of money that we could and should attach to nature as a resource. We need to recognize that. We need to protect nature as a valuable economic asset. We have to revisit the idea of payment for ecosystem services. What we're seeing is that Malaysian businesses and the financial sector are gaining serious interest in the monetary value of nature as a capital asset of the country as we make economic decisions. And we want to support that transition. We believe that nature conservation and protection is going to be a major contribution to Malaysia's own nationally determined contribution, which will be announced, I believe, in the first quarter of next year, and Malaysia's long-term strategies under the LULUCF, land use change and forestry sector. And we want to help Malaysia and support them as they make that nature offer. Where improvements are needed, the UK wants to be a willing partner with Malaysia to jointly raise the bar for sustainability. We can learn from each other. We have a long and deep bilateral relationship, including in nature governance, commodity development, bilateral trade, science research, development, and education. So, in conclusion, what we want is a transition towards protecting nature and its coexistence with more sustainable food systems. We need a renewed and scaled up effort to reforest and restore degraded ecosystems which add connectivity and enhance ecological and carbon value. We need to protect the biodiverse inhabitants of Malaysia and the people, of course, that are dependent on them. And we need to make the whole system resilient against forces like climate change. Now, all of that is going to need a whole society effort, including the national government, local authorities, communities, farmers, scientists, conservationists, business, the public, and above all, I would argue, the youth. In this day of webinars, with the support of many expert speakers, we're going to discuss and tackle some of the pertinent questions we need to answer. On my Malaysian nature tour, obviously COVID travel permitting, we're going to look at the local issues and possible solutions, and where possible, bring new perspectives to the table. The UK is ready to be bold and ambitious in partnership with you all, ahead of what we hope and believe will be a pivotally important COP15, the biodiversity COP in China, and COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. Thank you. So that was just a few introductory thoughts to try to set the scene for the Malaysian nature tours. Thank you for listening. We can come back to any of those issues. I fully expect that the panelists will be tackling a number of these questions and providing their own perspectives. We have the chat bar, so please do post any questions and Q&A. Before we turn to the panel for a discussion, and this is so that we can understand and see for ourselves what's at stake, rather than just talking heads, I'm pleased to share a short film that the British High Commissioners have produced with the support of WWF Malaysia and Scuba Zoo. I hope you enjoy it. Let's see the film now.
Malaysia, located just north of the equator, enjoys a hot and humid tropical climate. The country has some of the world's oldest tropical rainforests that extend from mountainous areas to coastal plains, including inland waters such as lakes and rivers. With their complex ecosystems and richness in species of both flora and fauna, Malaysia's tropical rainforests serve as a vast nature gene bank of incredible biological diversity. Its extensive coastline and marine environment includes a wide array of diverse habitats and ecosystems, including estuaries, mangrove forests, seagrass beds, and coral reefs. These habitats are home to some of the world's most diverse corals and marine life, including endangered sea turtles, whales, dugongs, and sharks. Blessed with this natural heritage, Malaysia is considered the world's 12th most megadiverse country. The forests and ocean also play a crucial role in mitigating the effects of climate change. Both are important storehouses of carbon as they absorb and lock in large quantities of carbon dioxide, making them excellent natural carbon sinks, especially the tropical peat swamp forests. However, if these crucial carbon sinks are disturbed or degraded through unsustainable use, these national treasures will instead become significant emitters of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, resulting in an exponential increase in greenhouse gases and even increasing global temperatures. Coastal ecosystems such as mangroves and mudflats, seagrass meadows and coral reefs also act as natural buffers and barriers against storm and wave surges, protecting coastal areas and communities from flooding and erosion. The rich ecosystem biodiversity of Malaysia's forests and ocean play important roles and provide nature-based solutions by ensuring the stability of the ecosystems, which are closely linked to the stability and success of the socio-economic development of the country and the well-being of its people. Healthy forests and oceans are critical for sustaining life eliminating poverty and promoting prosperity. Worldwide nature-based economic value is estimated at $125 trillion US, according to WWF's Living Planet Index 2018. Nature-based solutions are harnessing our energy needs via wind, sun, plant byproducts, wave, and tidal movements. However, despite the importance of the world's forests and ocean, they continue to be devastated by human activities, including indiscriminate development and land clearing, illegal logging, aggressive agriculture, and ocean-grabbing reclamation projects, overfishing, and pollution. All of these destructive actions devastate the world's biodiversity and deprive communities of access to the terrestrial, coastal, and marine resources they have traditionally relied on. Finding the correct balance continues to be the world's greatest challenge, especially subscribing to sustainable land use and seascape practices. In the last 50 years, WWF estimates that humanity is responsible for the extinction of 60% of mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles. Here in Malaysia, the Sumatran rhinoceros is now extinct, and the Malayan tiger, black shrew, Malayan tapir, orangutan, Borneo elephant, proboscis monkey, and Sunda pangolin are all endangered. The world's foremost experts warn that the annihilation of wildlife across the planet is now a global emergency that threatens civilization. A recent report published by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and NASA has confirmed that the last 10 years have been the hottest decade since record-keeping began 140 years ago. The analysis also showed that ocean temperatures were the highest they've ever been. These hotter temperatures have helped fuel natural disasters across the world: hurricanes, wildfires, and flooding. Worryingly, conditions are set to worsen unless we collectively take action now to reduce carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions to protect our planet for future generations. Global and local epidemics caused by zoonotic episodes of dormant viruses within wildlife hosts crossing over into human biological systems are on the rise as a direct result of our lack of respect for nature and wildlife. We need to amplify and scale up some of the nature-based solutions that we have innovated across the world, including in Malaysia. We need to build more good and impactful stories and not lose hope in nature providing some of the solutions we need to survive. The narratives for climate action and nature need a reboot within the national development and economic planning and discussions. Nature must be treated as an essential economic asset that should be built on, not destroyed. Science and science-based economics on nature must be enhanced and widely deployed. As the world begins to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, world leaders will meet at two very important international conferences in 2021. The UN Biodiversity Conference, COP15, will be held in China in May, and the UK will host the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties in November in Glasgow. It's important that both these conferences are a success and the world comes together to commit to build back greener, to commit to ambitious nationally determined contributions and long-term net zero strategies to reduce our global carbon footprint, to protect nature, and also to live more sustainably in harmony with nature, which is our life support system.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I apologize, it was more of my voice rather than anybody else's, but I thought the images were absolutely remarkable and very moving. So thank you very much indeed again to our partners in that, Scuba Zoo and the WWF. So let me move on now to introduce our first panelist who is going to speak, and it's Tansri Professor Zachary Abdul Hamid, who, as I said, is Ambassador and Science Advisor to the Campaign for Nature. Over to you, Tansri.
Thank you, Charles. Your Excellency, Charles Hayes, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored and delighted to be part of this discussion. And let me congratulate the High Commission for convening this tour and also for that excellent narrative that you just described, Charles. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked to speak on science and nature. And let me begin to say that science has always been with nature in Malaysia for a long time. And this nature tour that the High Commissioner is taking is very timely indeed, a timely reminder, if you will. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of the British naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace, who was doing his work or his nature tour in the 1800s. Now, Wallace is very famous, including as famous as Sir Charles Darwin. He is a co-discoverer of the theory of evolution, origin of species, theory of evolution by natural selection. So I think Malaysia and science has always been that way. Secondly, I must say, in describing the current problem in the world today, science has always been at the forefront, uh, uh, explaining the negative impact of human activities of the planet. We could start in 1962 uh, with the publication of Rachel Carson's book, The Silent Spring, the book that started the global grassroots environmental movement. It focuses on the negative effects of chemical pesticides that were at the time a large part of US agriculture. Carson's research found that birds ingesting DDT tended to lay thin shell eggs, which would in turn break prematurely in the nest, resulting in marked population decline. So Rachel Carson started a revolution, actually. But I like it when she pointed out the culprit is human. She said only within the moment of time represented by the present century has one species, human, acquired significant power to alter the nature of the world. Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, today, human beings have acquired the role of a geological force. Can you imagine that? Through our activities, we have changed the chemistry of our atmosphere, causing sea level to rise and iceberg to melt. Climate change. So the destructiveness of humankind met with a strong rebuke in the release of the Brundtland's report, Our Common Future in 1987, with the message defining what is sustainable development, which all of us would know. That is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the world's attention on sustainable development, biodiversity loss, climate change reached a climax with the convening of the Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio, where three major treaties was signed in Rio, namely the Climate Change Treaty, the Biodiversity Treaty, and the Treaty to Combat Desertification. It was also during this time, as the High Commissioner mentioned, Malaysia, one of the earliest countries to pledge that 80% of our ground cover is covered with percent. So, and this is where also the role of science is significant. In the negotiation, they not only involve the lawyers, the diplomats, the business sector, the NGOs, but also the scientists. The scientists is during this mega meeting, which contribute towards a lot of solutions to the global challenges. So since the Earth Summit, the international community has convened about 12 major conferences which have committed governments to address urgently some of the most pressing problems facing the world today. Taken together, these high-profile meetings have achieved a global consensus on the priorities for a new development agenda for the 1990s and beyond. And that second climax would be in 2015, when there was a summit in New York in which heads of governments pledged to the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, the 17, which is now being played out by the global community. And again, as mentioned by the chairman, two of those issues is going to be highlighted next year, namely the climate change in Glasgow and also biodiversity in Kunming, China. I just want to impress, ladies and gentlemen, on the role of science again. Science, or in its broader understanding as science, technology, and innovation, including engineering, as well as the social sciences and the humanities, plays a crucial role for sustainable development. The 2030 Agenda attributes diverse roles to science with regard to the different areas of social, economic, and environmental goals. While there is no stand-alone goal on science, there is not a single SDG in the new agenda that will not require inputs from the natural or the social scientists and engineers. Indeed, for it to succeed, the implementation of the new development agenda needs to be based on an integrated scientific approach, guided by the holistic understanding of science, and must be grounded in the best available knowledge. And two of those platforms, which is playing out now, is the famous IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which won the Nobel Peace Prize, and the International Platform on Science Policy for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. So again, the role of science cannot be underestimated. Let me close by saying that most of these challenges are global in nature. The scientific collaboration needs to be forged internationally. So in that context, let me quote your former British Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, when he launched the science diplomacy program with the British Royal Society. And he said, I quote, "Many of the challenges we face today are international. And whether it's tackling climate change or fighting disease, as we have seen in this COVID-19, These global problems require global solutions. That is why it is important that we create a new role for science in international policy making and diplomacy to place science at the heart of the progressive international agenda. End quote. Let me also conclude by saying, Charles, you are ambassador to your country, but you can easily fit in as an ambassador to Malaysia. And for that, I thank you. Thank you.
Sansri, thank you very much. You're very kind. Thank you for your very important words about the role of science, and I'm sure we'll come back to that at different points and in the Q&A. It's such an important and fundamental part of this whole jigsaw puzzle. Can I move now to our second panelist, Dr. Henry Chan, who is Director of Conservation, WWF Malaysia. Thanks, Henry. We can see your slides, but I can't hear you.
Thank you. Thank you, Excellency. And as well for inviting WWF Malaysia to be one of your co-hosts for these events. And you have led a message early on in the narrative and in the video presentation of how once we have a beautiful environment and how the contest for the use of natural resources has resulted in that degradation. So this narrative is not just happening in our country, but it's happening all over the world. And Tan Sri's message has informed us that this has, resulted in the global community coming together to combat that degradation of the environment. So in this context, then, the role of WWF Malaysia comes into the picture. And what I would like to share with you is our vision for a Malaysia that is sustainable. Indeed, the problems that are confronting us is not just faced by our community, but by the global community at large. And hence, the WWF Malaysia, being part of a global community of a civil society, needs to embrace the vision of how we can localize the global ambitions that the global community has envisioned for us. So I'd like to now move on to laying out the foundation of the work that we do in the WWF Malaysia. We are guided by our mission, which WWF embraces all over the world. That is, we are here to build a future in which humans live in harmony with nature. And the premise of our work is built on this core conservation of wildlife. We have two premises. The first is that we must secure our wildlife from being poached and entering into illegal wildlife trade. Later in the evening, my colleague Sharif will talk about how our effort together with the governments, with the National Parks and Wildlife Division, working together to prevent our national heritage, the tigers, from being entering into extinction. The second area of work, which is much bigger than the first one, is that we need to secure the wildlife habitats and our natural ecosystems from being degraded and lost. Here is where we deal with policies, supporting government to enact protected areas, working with the logging companies to have good forest management, with palm oil plantations to have good practices and so forth. And all this work that we do actually contributes to Malaysia being a country that is a major country towards carbon sink. And our work can be organized into the three pillars of protect, produce, and restore. And later in the evening as well, my colleague, Glenn Davis, will be talking in details how these three pillars will be integrated. So I just want to illustrate a few examples of what we mean by this, by the three pillars. The first one is we work with the local community in the highlands in Sarawak to protect the rivers from being eroded, arising from the fast water movement that cause erosion. Another example which we do in Sabah, this is a celebrated case of where we have supported the government to identify places important for orangutan. So we undertake area survey, we do drone survey and verified the ground survey. And places, as you see in the map here, shows the level of orangutan. The dark orangey colors are places with high orangutan population. So this is where the government uses our information to determine whether an area needs to be protected or otherwise. On the produce pillar, essentially it's about having a sustainable production of food or production and commodities. Here again, at the same place where we undertake the riverbank restoration, we work with the Lumbawang community to improve of their of the traditional rice systems. On the last pillar of restore, which is restoring the degraded habitat, this example is we work with the Iban community in Sarawak to undertake a plant called the gaharu to produce into tea. And with this plantation of gaharu, then the forest will eventually come back for the orangutans. And this, I'm coming to the middle of my presentation now. And when we integrate all these three pillars of protect, produce, and restore, using the example of elephant conservation integrated into palm oil and forestry plantation, we can see that various uses can be integrated into large landscapes. The dark greens are the forest reserves and the protected areas, and the other colors are basically land that be concessioned out for various users. And in this case, we're working with one private company called the Sabah Softwood, and on the protect pillar, we have identified where are the elephant movements via satellite tracking of the elephants. So every dot shows every movement of elephants in every 4 hours. So because of this work, the company has agreed to set aside this land of 1,000 hectares to connect these two forest areas and allowing the animals from these two forest blocks to move between one place to the next. And that allows then this place to be restored. And we are very happy to hear the next speaker, Unilever, actually contributing to the work to do the restoration. And then we work with the surrounding landscape to ensure that the elephants can be allowed to move within the plantation and therefore living in harmony with the plantation. And here we are proud to say that HSBC Bank has supported us on our work. Now, when we look at the specific pillar, putting them together, embracing it into a landscape, we need to escalate this up into the national context of how these three pillars, when we put them together, allows Malaysia to be a sustainable nation. So I will now share the last part of my presentation on our vision and what we aspire for a sustainable Malaysia by 2030. So our vision here is basically to reverse the decline of nature. And following that, then to transition Malaysia into a sustainable nation. How do we do this? We are building on the work that we have done over the years. We are building on the work that Malaysia has made commitments based on the various policies and the regulations and the work that they have done with the private sectors. So we have 4 pathways, and this is basically following the WWF network on what we call the New Deal for People and Nature, in which we want to inspire our governments throughout the world to be ambitious in the next convention in China as well as in Glasgow next year. So we have 4 pathways. The first is that we want to cluster our aspirations according to habitat. This habitat is then managed and protected for wildlife. And surrounding this natural habitat, then we look at the footprint, how we produce our food, how we produce our commodities for them to be sustainable. And the 4th pathway is about enablers. These are like policies, market practices, as well as finance. I'll spend a bit of time on this 9 aspiration. Charles, allow me to spend a bit more time beyond the 10 minutes. So the first is that, as we heard repeatedly from you and from Tan Sri, that Malaysia has pledged in the Earth Summit to have 50% as natural forest cover. What we would like the government to do is to legislate this, and not just make a pledge. And we're very happy to inform you that in our analysis, Malaysia has actually legislated already 48%, yeah, either as protected areas or forest reserves. And we can actually go beyond that because Sarawak has yet to achieve the final policy goal of 6 million hectare of forest reserve, and there's a gap of 1.7 million hectare. The second one is more towards the commodities and production. We aspire for 60% of Malaysia to be sustainably managed and therefore boosting green economy. Now, where does this 60% come from? The first aspiration of the 50% is actually divided into two categories. The first is 20% will be legislated as protected areas. The second category is the 30% for sustainable forest management. So this means logging will be undertaken properly. From that 30%, the next 20% comes from the policy to limit our palm oil plantation to 20% of Malaysia and make it mandatory to be certified. So that becomes 50%. The next 10%, which make out a total of 60%, comes from food security area, rubber, cocoa, and so on. Yeah. So we believe that when we put all these things together, Malaysia is able to achieve 60% in 2030. When we talk about how we restore areas into green corridors, we talk about how we would like to work with the authorities and the players to ensure all of our coastal seas, these 30 miles beyond our shores, to be sustainably managed. I wouldn't want to go beyond more than that, but to just go into number 6. When we put all these things together, Malaysia becomes an important carbon sink, a green lung of the world. And when we achieve sustainability in all the things that we do, particularly in the palm oil sector, then we can set a motion towards zero net emissions by 2030. And then we will be on the pathway towards a carbon neutral country by 2050, or what we call zero net emissions by 2050. So with that, Your Excellency, I would like to conclude and by saying that there's 3 take-home messages. The first is that by having protect, produce, and restore, it forms the basis for conservation at different scale of engagement. When integrated, it will be large scale. And when all these things is interwoven into a national context, the impact of conservation will be seen at the global scale. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Henry. Very impressive presentation, and WWF has been such an icon in the world of conservation and sustainability, certainly for as long as I can remember. Is it 50 years coming up, the celebration now?
It will be 2 years. So next January or February, we're going to launch our 50 year. Like you, we have been 1 year in preparation, and we'll be delighted you can be our partner in hosting that 50th anniversary.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, I'm looking forward to that. Some very interesting issues I'm sure we'll come back to. One of the most striking things for me, and I think a really, really important issue, is the question of livelihoods, because people need to be able to make a living. There's no point trying to preserve the natural world in kind of isolation from humanity. It's just not going to work. We need to work with local communities. And that brings us on to our next speaker, David Ingram, Chief Procurement Officer, Unilever. So, David, you and your company perform an absolutely vital role, and sometimes gets caught, I think, in the middle between the voices for conservation, but also the voice of business and of economics, and sometimes a very difficult path to walk down, it seems to me. And I believe I'm right in saying that you're the lead in Unilever for the Forest Coalition of Consumer Goods. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. David, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Charles, and thanks for coordinating this really important event. Important for Malaysia, but also important for us when you see what our footprint is. Maybe if I can spend a couple of minutes for those that don't know Unilever. We're a business with brands. We've got about 400 brands around the world. Hopefully you'll know some of them: Knorr, Lipton, Dove, Sunsilk, Omo, Wall's Ice Cream. We operate in 190 countries, and about 2.5 billion people every day will touch and consume or use one of our brands. Our company was born from purpose. So Lord Lever started in the north of England more than 100 years ago, making soap affordable because housewives and children were not getting access to good soap and were getting disease as a result of that. And he gave birth to a business which was a sustainable business in the sense that it had a factory, of course, it sourced product, but it gave a community around that factory of hospital, school, housing for people to work, so that people can afford to work at the factory. And that's sort of at the core purpose of us as Unilever. We retain that purpose to make sustainable living commonplace. And it's a driver of our business, not something that we do as a result of making profit. The planet and the people on this planet, if they're not sustainable, we won't have a consumer business, or no one will have a consumer business going forward. And our responsibility is large. We are accountable for about 30 million tons of carbon. We farm around 3 million hectares globally. And we've got roughly 2 million people directly associated with our extended supply chain. 100,000 of those in our own business, but 2 million directly connected. And much of those, to be honest, given our footprint in Palm, are in Malaysia. Now, we've set out what we call multi-year priorities around plastic, climate and nature and social. And these are deeply supported by technology and partnerships, which you, Charles, and a few others have mentioned are so critical. Partnerships with NGOs, with governments, with peer companies, with the youth, with the communities are essential. Now, if I go specifically to Palm, Malaysia, we have a very large footprint. We've, of course, been long-term committed to RSPO. Full volume is associated with that. And our core focus is to make sure that our direct palm oil supply chain is sustainable and clearly deforestation free. And we're identifying right now the specific sources that ensure that as we go forward. And we're pleased with the progress we're making in that more focused sourcing agenda. It both ensures deforestation and sustainability, but interestingly, will also contribute about 30% efficiency in our own climate impact in palm alone by focusing on higher quality, more sustainable sources. At the same time as that focus, we're also conscious that the marginalized participants around the edges of our communities may be affected by us focusing our sources in single locations. And that's why we've got two-pronged attack approach. One is to focus our sourcing to ensure sustainability and deforestation free. And the other one is to be at the forefront of ensuring that landscapes and jurisdictions have got support, funding, and that we put our weight behind their development. And Henry was calling out the specific work in Sabah, where we're supporting WWF on 70,000 hectares of land, of all palm land in Sabah, towards RSPO certification. This work alone will help reduce 17 million tons of CO2 in greenhouse gas emissions. So these two approaches in our sourcing, and we're doing this across all crops that we source globally, but particularly important for Malaysia, are directed sourcing to ensure that we source sustainably and deforestation free, and that we know that livelihoods, to your latter point, Charles, livelihoods are sustained and sustainable going forward, but also that landscapes and jurisdictions are developed to make a wider impact. And we do believe that corporations like ourselves have got a heavy responsibility to do that. So not just to worry about our own sourcing, but to make sure that we have a wider impact across the community. I mentioned technology and partnerships. Partnerships are fundamentally important across those ranges, including technology partnerships. So we've recently announced work with Orbital Insight and with Google Earth Engine, where the multiple layers of data that are now available around land use, biodiversity, animal welfare. On top of all that standard data, we can overlay movement and flow of materials. And using Google Earth Engine, we can actually see how our sourcing is impacting and exactly where our sourcing is coming from through our chain, even in the extremely complex chain of palm. So these developments of technology, wide partnerships, focused sourcing, and accountability for wider jurisdictions are really the center of our strategy in Malaysia and across the palm network. I'm sure there'll be some questions on that later. I'll pause now and allow others to go on.
David, thanks very much indeed. That's really interesting. I was particularly interested to hear you say that you've been able to take measures on your palm procurement, which are not just good in terms of deforestation, eliminating the risk of deforestation, but also in terms of improving your own business efficiency, which is, I think, an interesting example of where doing the right thing can be, good for business as well as good for the environment.
Yeah, look, what's essential, I mean, I forgot to pull it out specifically. The inclusion of smallholder farmers is critical in this overall equation. It's where we know that yields can be improved, where livelihoods can be improved by the yields being improved. And, the inclusion of farmers, these people are really the stewards of the land, the forefront of controlling and taking care of the land and ensuring that we include those in our supply chain and not exclude them. Ensuring that they are sustainable practices are trained and developed and used, therefore giving better yield, therefore giving a livelihood which is sustainable, is an absolutely critical circular part of this whole equation.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm sure we will come back to some of these points. It's of great public interest, as we all know very well. But let me come to our fourth panelist, last but absolutely not least, Julian Teixeira, who is project manager for the Malaysian youth delegation. Julian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Charles Hay. So good morning, everyone. Good morning, Tan Sri Professor Zachary, Dr. Henry, Mr. David, and Your Excellency again. So it's a real pleasure and honor to be invited to be part of this high-level panel on the launch of the Malaysian Nature Tour from the British High Commission. So I was invited this morning to speak about youth engagement on climate action and climate change in Malaysia, and also about nature-based solutions. So I will be talking about the organization I work for, the Malaysian Youth Delegation, and also some of our recent public engagements with regards to nature-based solutions. So why do youth care about climate change? Former US President Barack Obama once said, "We are the first generation to feel the effect of climate change and the last generation who can do something about it." And this is especially true for the youth of today, the millennials and the Gen Zs, who will face the consequences of climate change over the course of their entire adult lives, which is not the case for their parents and grandparents' generations. So the youth care about climate change because it will shape their futures. The youth of today, however, also have the potential to find solutions and take effective action on climate change. Millennials and Gen X are also on average better educated than their parents and grandparents. Tech savvy, they have access to more information and knowledge than ever before, thanks to the internet and the digital revolution. Youth also have passion, hope, and creativity, which can be applied to solving for climate change. Youth have also not yet been fully conditioned and habituated to accepting mindsets and ways of working, which resulted in the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. Hence, we can be more creative in pursuing solutions to these crises. Youth, especially those of us who are still single, we also have fewer commitments, so we can take more risks with our careers as well. And we can, for example, choose to work on the climate crisis rather than take up more traditional professions. So in the spirit of youth taking action on climate change, the Malaysian Youth Delegation, MYD, was founded in 2015 as a youth-led climate policy, research, advocacy, and diplomacy organization. It is the only such youth organization in Malaysia. MYD has a number of organizational priorities which are laid out on the slide. The first is the capacity building of youth to be able to effectively participate in climate policy, advocacy, and diplomacy. In line with this, MYD undertakes workshops and research projects to enhance youth literacy and climate change and policy. So one program we have been running is our training series, which we implemented this year in partnership with the National University of Malaysia, UKM. So MYD members gave virtual presentations this year on topics such as climate policy and governance and climate finance to students of UKM. Another priority for MYD is to connect Malaysian youth with global climate policy and environmental institutions. MYD does so by representing Malaysian youth at international climate conferences such as the COPs, and we have been doing so since COP21 in Paris in 2015. Furthermore, MYD also prioritizes stakeholder engagement. MYD engages with state, civil society, and academic leaders to influence climate policy and research priorities. During a recent engagement, MYD had the opportunity to provide feedback to the Ministry of Environment and Water on Malaysia's nationally determined Contribution 1, which has an adaptation focus and which is currently being updated. MYD's feedback emphasized that the Action for Climate Empowerment ACE agenda for youth education and participation in the climate movement should be embedded into the NDC. MYD also contributed ideas for nature-based adaptation infrastructure solutions to be included into the updated NDC 1 on adaptation. Finally, MYD also undertakes public education by making the latest thinking on climate change more accessible to the general public, especially to youth, through various channels such as social media and articles on our website. In line with MYD's organizational priorities, MYD has been organizing our flagship annual conference, the Malaysian Local Conference of Youth, since 2018. This is a conference under the auspices of YOUNGO, the official UN Youth Climate Constituency. This year's edition, My Alcoy 2020, with the theme of mobilizing for a green post-COVID recovery, is the only such Alcoy in Southeast Asia this year, and it brings together climate experts, leaders, activists, and passionate youth from across Malaysia and Southeast Asia to exchange knowledge, ideas, and experiences virtually, and to equip youth with the understanding and skills they need to mobilize and lead national and regional movements for climate action. My Alcoy 2020 started 2 weekends ago, on the 28th of November, and will conclude this weekend on Sunday, 13 December. My Alcoy 2020 has attracted 700 signups so far from across Southeast Asia, and attendance at sessions has averaged about 100 people per session, and we have more actually tuning in on the Facebook Live webcasts as well of the sessions, which are held on Zoom. And this year, MYD has made nature-based solutions a thematic priority at the Malaysian Alcoy for the first time. We did so firstly because we recognize that climate change and biodiversity loss are interconnected crises, and that nature-based solutions can help to resolve those crises. We also wanted to be aligned with the international environmental agenda. So as we've already heard, 2020, and now that's been postponed to 2021, this is supposed to be a super year for nature and the climate, with the COP26 in Glasgow, the UK, and also the UN Biodiversity Conference in Kunming, China. Finally, MYD also chose to highlight nature-based solutions at My Alcoy 2020 because such solutions make sense for a country like Malaysia that is endowed with an abundance of natural resources, rich biodiversity, and a range of ecosystems, as we just saw in the video that was shown earlier this morning. So at My Alcoy 2020, MYD convened an expert panel to speak on the subject of nature-based solutions last Sunday, 6 December. The first panelist was Ms. Lavanya Iyer, Head of Policy and Climate Change at WWF Malaysia, who introduced the concept of nature-based solutions and situated them within the context of the Anthropocene. She also discussed the challenges and opportunities of nature-based solutions for climate mitigation and adaptation in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, and how youth could contribute to them. The second panelist, Dr. Lee Jo Kien, lead analyst at the Tropical Rainforest Research and Conservation Center, discussed the importance of peatland conservation to mitigate carbon emissions from Southeast Asia. He also spoke about the conservation of dipterocarp forests, which are prevalent in Malaysia. The third panelist, Dr. Satrio Adi Wicaksono, an Indonesian climate scientist, spoke about how coastal and marine ecosystems in Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, are being impacted by climate change and how they could be conserved. And the fourth and final panelist, Katrin Bimson from IUCN Asia, introduced the IUCN Standard on Nature-Based Solutions and also discussed wetlands conservation in Southeast Asia. A general takeaway from all the panelists' presentations is that there is a lot of potential for the nature-based solutions to contribute to climate action in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. The The youth participants who tuned in on Zoom and also watching on Facebook Live also enjoyed the session, and the majority of them responded in the feedback form that they felt a lot more familiar with nature-based solutions after the panel. We also recommend the panel to their friends, family, and colleagues. And for those of you who missed the panel, the recording is available on MYD's Facebook page at MYD Climate, so you can still watch it as well if you're interested. And besides My Alcoy 2020, MYD also had another recent occasion to highlight the importance of nature-based solutions, namely the Technical Examination Process and Adaptation TEPA Youth Policy Case Competition organized by UNFCCC. A team from MYD comprising myself and a few other friends submitted a proposal for a nature-based restoration of the Penchala River in the Klang Valley to mitigate flooding risks and reduce urban heat, the consequences of climate change. Our proposal, the program Pemulihan Penchala or Penchala River Restoration Program, made it to the finals of the competition, and we had a chance to present our ideas to a jury of adaptation experts. We envisioned a holistic nature-based river restoration and riverbank rejuvenation program that can include water diversion features, a community garden, and exercise trails. The program would have environmental benefits and also have the potential to renew the local community and strengthen intercommunal bonds. Nature-based river restoration programs have been successfully implemented elsewhere, such as for the Laotie River in Taiwan and the Sokolovka River in the industrial city of Łódź, Poland, a project that was supported by the European Union. Nature-based river restoration has not yet been tried for urban rivers in Malaysia, even though they have the potential to generate both environmental and social benefits and are likely to be more cost-effective than traditional river management efforts relying on hard engineering infrastructure. MYD's success in reaching the finals of the TEPA Youth Policy Case Competition has helped to raise the profile of our idea, and we hope that Malaysian policymakers will consider it. While MYD has been taking steps to build public awareness and understanding of nature-based solutions and to engage experts and policymakers on the subject, we do have some unanswered questions on the subject, which I would like to end my presentation today with. These questions mostly revolve around the financing of nature-based solutions, and questions like these came up during the panel on Sunday as well, and they were raised by youth participants tuning in on Zoom and on Facebook Live. So the questions include, among others, so how do developed countries like the UK intend to fund nature-based solutions, and what benefits will partnering countries receive? Will there be conditions placed on partnering countries in which these nature-based solutions are implemented, for example, carbon credit sharing, /claims by funders? If nature-based solutions are proposed, how will they be protected against competing, less sustainable development agendas? And what valuation methods will be used to value nature-based solutions? So will these values be translatable into markets by being tradable? So perhaps some of these questions can be addressed during the panel discussion as well by the expert panelists. So thank you very much for your time and attention.
Julian, thank you very much indeed. That was very interesting. And my congratulations to you and your colleagues for managing to organize such a successful Alcoy, which is still, of course, ongoing with one more weekend to go. And it looks like you had a very broad spread of participation. And thank you also for your questions at the end there on financing of nature-based solutions. I'm not sure how easily we're going to be able to get into all of them, but let's give it a go. But maybe let's start by going back, if we may, to the issue of science. And one of the things that seems to me to have changed quite dramatically over the past years is an increase in our scientific understanding of the implications of some of the things that are happening in the natural world. By that I mean, I suppose when I first became aware of conservation and the work of the WWF and so on, it was a sort of, it was a sad thing that these animals were dying out, but that was it. But now I think we're increasingly understanding the interconnectedness of all of that, and the fact that species are at risk, biodiversity is risk, is actually a warning sign to us of much deeper and more important things that are happening, which are potentially moving towards the irreversible. And I think NGOs have changed their approach towards a much more scientific approach in their arguments on protecting nature. So I'd be interested in people's reflections on that. I mean, do you think that that science, as you're engaging with people, with stakeholders, is science becoming increasingly important in the way that we are interacting on these questions?
You want me to answer that?
Why don't you start off, Tan Sri? Yeah.
All right. I think the science is not at fault. The scientists have developed tons of data on scientific facts. I think the problem now, Charles, is the messaging. How do you convey that scientific message to the public? In particular, it's not only the public, but those, the likes of political leaders and also policymakers. Those are the movers and shakers. Secondly, the scientists need to connect with iconic figures. I give you one example. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have been doing great work for a long time and driving the message about the danger of global warming. But they only got attention when people like Al Gore, the former vice president, American vice president, collaborate with them. Al Gore gave them the space and the profile. To make a long story short, in the end, the climate change message is so brilliant, you know, and they even won the Nobel Peace Prize. In the case of biodiversity loss, we has not really found those champions, you know. So again, I say the science policy interface is the key. You were saying about the jigsaw just now. I think the science policy interface is the last piece that connects the jigsaw. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we're all struggling with at the moment is increased public distrust of experts, of scientists, and you know, who would have thought that so many people in the world now don't believe in the evolution of the species, and so on and so forth. It is rather a puzzling phenomenon. But Henry, what's your perspective on this? When you're communicating with I mean, what is driving the people that support you, do you think, and working with you?
Well, of course, we have many range of supporters. At the global level, we have our flagship report, which you have cited earlier, the Living Planet report. We publish every 2 years, and we collaborate with research institutions like the London Zoological Society, the Stockholm Resilience Institute, and Oxford University. So we have very robust profiles of data that we need to analyze, and it's based on like 2 years of changes, and before we can affirm the evidence that we show, of which you cited that since 1970. We have decline of like 60% of various species in the world. So this is widely accepted by many communities. Now, at the local level, the example of which I cited of Sabah Soft Wood, where the company has set aside 1,000 hectares of titled land, for the wildlife corridor. This translates to millions of ringgit, because it's land. How did the company manage to convince the board to set aside? It's through information, it's through sciences. So I mentioned about how we put satellite collaring to the elephants, and every 4 hours they'll be tracked by satellite, and that information is then analyzed over the last couple of years. It's a 10-year information, and you find at certain places meant for elephant movements. So it's very clear that if you don't put the corridor there's no free movement of the elephants. The elephant will just simply trash your plantations. And consequently, from the financial data that they have, Sabah Soft Wood, before they put up this elephant conservation, the damage that they impacted were like 500,000 every year. And when they put in place these conservation measures, the damage has reduced to 5,000, and the last 2-3 years, it has consistently been reduced to 3,000 to 2,000 ringgit, which is completely negligible to the cost. So science is very important, and it is very important because if you give government half-baked information and that resulted in certain policy formulation, it will have drastic impact. We're talking about millions and millions of impact. The things that can go wrong.
Yeah, thank you very much. David, I'm interested in your reflections on this too. I mean, you outlined, I mean, Unilever, a global company, has a huge footprint, huge influence. What you do is a real driver. You've got very extensive R&D as well. I'd be interested to know to what extent your R&D now is driven by the kind of sustainability messages that you've been that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, to a large extent. Look, I think firstly, I personally believe that science is helping enormously move our clarity from emotion to impact. We're getting a far greater view on impact, and we can manage then changes and measure changes. And what we can't measure, we can't do much about. So I think it's been just enormously beneficial. We're also, we talked a lot about certification, and that's a big part of what's been great in the last 10, 15 years. But we have to go beyond that. We have to go beyond that, and science takes us beyond that. From an R&D perspective, we've put out across our 3 divisions quite substantial shifts in our business strategies, whether it's in home care towards a cleaner future, where we said we'll move from all fossil-based home care sourcing to renewable-based. That's a dramatic shift. We'll build a business of $1 billion of moving from meat to plant-based foods. Now, the only way we can shift these is with R&D at the very, very core. So we've also announced increased investments in R&D, and you can see our R&D shifting from small-scale renovation type of innovation work into far more fundamental, shifts from fossil to plant-based or fossil to biochemistry-based R&D. So it is strongly redirecting our R&D resources.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and that shift from fossil, of course, is the big shift that we all need collectively to undertake if we're going to meet our climate change commitments. I'm interested also in the pressure that you feel from your consumers, which must be quite intense. I mean, does that come across as sort of driven by campaigns or by scientific understanding, or how does that feel to a company like yours?
Yeah. I think you get it directly in sales. So most of us do consumer insight sessions a couple of times a year. I did one last year in Cheltenham in England, actually. I walked around with a consumer. You just listen to why they're choosing different products. And I was flabbergasted just how much they were choosing around plastic in that occasion. They were making 80% of consumer decisions around is there excess plastic packaging on this product, or this brand versus this brand. So consumers are driving an awareness on plastic, an increasing awareness on source, on the sustainability of the source, and on the social integrity of the product. So they want to know where it was sourced. Not just that it was certified, but where it was sourced, which farm, which field, which farmer, what was the payment, what's the chain of custody, what's my carbon footprint? And for us to have that, obviously, as a company, we need to be asking and leveraging our supply base and our suppliers to have that information effectively on invoice. So we have set an ambition to have a carbon on invoice for all of our suppliers, so that we can ultimately give that to consumers as they buy a product. I would see that developing into social impact on pack, or available through QR code on pack very soon. So it's absolutely at the sharp end of why we have set out these ambitions and why we believe they are so required.
Mm. Yeah, that's very interesting. Interesting that it's so detailed. I see this in my own home with my 2 daughters, who are 11 and 14, who are enormously skeptical, I have to say, about palm oil. And we've had lots of conversations about sustainability and sustainability standards. And we'll maybe come back to that in a minute, because I think that's a very important thing, certainly as far as Malaysia is concerned. But Julian, interested in your views on this as well. I mean, the people that you have joining you, the voice of youth. I mean, the voice of youth is, what is it that's driving that? Do you think it's a sort of very much a science-based approach and understanding, or is it more emotional?
Thank you, Your Excellency, for the question. I would say it's a combination of science-based and emotional, actually. So we at MYD, we recognize the importance of science and evidence for climate action and climate policy making. And actually, during our My Alcoy conference on the first day, on 28th November, we actually had an evidence-based climate policy making panel, and some of our panelists included MYD members who are working with partners such as UNDP and UNICEF on a youth climate change survey, and also some of our other MYD members are going to be working with other experts from the IPCC on a new upcoming research project and survey as well. So we do value science and evidence. At the same time, I think the emotional dimension is also really important. I think, as I mentioned, that we, the youth, are going to live with the consequences of climate change. I think when we face up to the consequences of that, the reality of the destruction of the natural world of our planet, I think there is something quite visceral that is triggered in us, and I think there's this realization that this is our only home. Like, this planet is our only home that we have no planet B, so we really need to do something about it, and we have a responsibility to ourselves and also to the generations that will come after us.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Julian. We've got a couple of questions coming in. I'm going to put the first one to you. It's from Hannah Halim, but it's for all of us. But let's start with you, Julian. So Hannah asks, the average person is inundated with a lot of doom and gloom messaging, especially about climate change, and a lot of people, she feels that people are just turning off to those messages. So how do we carry on advocating for the environment in the face of this fatigue?
Thank you for that question, Hannah. Thank you, Your Excellency. So the climate crisis is dire and grave, and the biodiversity crisis as well. So the science is very clear on that. However, as former US President Barack Obama mentioned, that while we are the generation that's experiencing the consequences of climate change, we are also the generation that can do something about it. And while the window of opportunity for effective action is closing, change is still possible. We can still take action. Solutions are still possible, and we need to act now and act fast. And it's important to not give in to despair, but to hold on to hope and to act on that hope. Actually, while the window of opportunity, narrow as it is, it's still open. And also on the part of MYD, yes, sometimes we are human as well, and sometimes we do get worn down by like the advocacy and the public education, and trying to work against like apathy or climate skepticism. However, I think how we go about resolving this is also we recognize, for example, the importance of having a community of support. So like the great thing about being part of MYD is that, like, I know I'm not alone in caring about the planet. I have like friends around me who are equally passionate, who equally care about the planet, who want to do something about it. So I think finding a community, building that community if needed, is a good way of managing the doom and gloom, and also to keep your spirits up, to keep going, and also take time to take care of yourself. And also, for example, spending time in nature is also a great way to really revive one's energies and spirits. And we realize then why what we're doing is so meaningful, because this planet is worth fighting for, especially like a country as beautiful as Malaysia with such rich natural ecosystems. It's really worth fighting for.
Yeah, I mean, I can really relate to the phenomenon that Hannah is describing. And for me, actually, coming back to something you were talking about earlier, Julian, your renovation of the riverbanks. And, we can show through, perhaps not huge projects, small projects, medium projects, that we can make a difference and we can somehow, make things better. One of the nicest things I've done since I arrived in Malaysia, and this was before COVID, was go to a place called the Raja Musa Forest Reserve. This is part of the Queen's, it's a Commonwealth effort, the Queen's Canopy project. And again, this has been a project involving the community, local government, federal government here in Malaysia, and they've renovated and restituted some peat forest. And this peat forest was really very badly degraded, and it was a huge effort that was put into to restoring it. So I think that, you know, for me, it shows that we can set things right, and you can restore forests, you can work to restore some of the things that we've ruined. But it feels like sometimes it's a very, very big and steep mountain to climb. Henry, what's your take on that?
Take on what? What's the question again?
The question is, how do we avoid being brought down by all the doom and gloom and despair of climate change, and kind of keep on going and keep on working at it?
Right. I think from the perspective of climate, you know, for the last 10, 15 years, there was a lot of doom and glooms, right? There were a lot of expectations in Copenhagen, where countries would come together and agree on something. But you know what? We have actually moved the debate in Paris in 2015, when the governments of the world came together and finally agree that, look, 2 degrees Celsius of temperature rise above the industrial age can no longer be tolerated, right? I mean, before that, nobody can agree with that. And not only that, the governments also agree that 2 degrees Celsius is not enough. We have to bring it down to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That is a major achievement in terms of that global consensus. And yeah, we still have problems. We're still seeing the impact of climate. Have been the sea rise is happening, the ice are melting, and the glaciers are melting as well. But the most important thing is, for the prior that 15 years, there were a lot of resistance. Paris was a shift, yeah. And next year, 5 years of the Paris Agreement have been signed on by all the governments of the world, is when the governments will come in and report what have they achieved. And that's where, you know, the UK being a host, starting this journey 1 year in advance is very crucial. Is to identify what else can we do. And this is exactly the mission, the message that WWF is sending across our partners and supporters. We have actually achieved a lot of things, yeah. But because we are looking at the half glass empty, so everything is going wrong. But if we turn around and look at half glass full, things are going to become better. Like we have been saying that deforestation is rampant in Malaysia. It's true if we compare to the turn of the century. If we compare to 1970, things are already been going bad. But the decline has already been halted. We are now at the threshold bottom, and we're picking up. Yeah, very few people would know that we have actually legislated 48% of Malaysia as protected areas and forest reserves. I think if this information comes from, sorry to say, our government, nobody would believe in them. But because this analysis comes from a civil society like WWF, based on sciences, people would believe in that. Yeah, and we are shifting that, you know, areas to be legislated. We are seeing, you know, a lot of statements were made that private companies are the evil, right? They are the ones who devastate the environment, clear the forests, and, you know, make us want to buy as much as possible. But we have, you know, evidence like David's company of Unilever coming in, making pledges that we're going to make a change. And governments of the world, in terms of degradation, I just want to end with these 2 points, that in 2012, in Bonn, Germany, the governments of the world come together and agree to undertake restoration of land for 200 million hectares. That is called the Bonn Challenge. Now, where do you find these 200 million hectares, right? Governments have to identify where they are. Why is it important these places must be restored? And funding must be made in place, yeah? Now, after that, the private sector came together in New York and agreed that the 200 million hectares is not enough. I have now pledged to restore another 150 million hectares, and that is called the New York Declaration of Forests. So government in one challenge, private sector in New York have made a change. The shift has already happened. Yeah, it's now riding on that message, looking for more and more like-minded organizations coming together with coalitions, and we know that the business community have many councils, yeah, all pushing towards the climate change agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And I think one of the things that I've certainly seen myself, I've been involved in climate change discussion and debates for more than 15 years now, going back to 2005, the G8 summit at Glen Eagles. And then there was a lot of discussion about, you know, about why we should be bothered about these things. Now that conversation is basically over. Now it's more about how. How do we deal with it? How do we move on? How do we make progress? Before I bring in the other panelists, I'm going to now ask the our edX colleagues to show us a video called "The Clock is Ticking." So that kind of reinforces the point, I think, that Hannah was making. David, what are your reflections on this? I mean, how can we work better with business to make the change that we need to make?
Yeah, look, I think firstly on Hannah's question, I think it is on people's mind. I thought, by the way, Julian, if I was going to think of an answer, it was exactly what Julian said. It was brilliant. We do have to pivot the discussion into opportunity. And the opportunity for sure is there, whether it's small, medium or large, and all are important. So, you know, for us, the type of work we're doing with WWF and the type of work we're doing with Orbital or Google is all critical and all important. And it's important for us also to bring that to the brand. And one of the things we feel we've under-leveraged a little bit in the last 10 years is, are we bringing these messages to people through the brand and through our products so that people can engage in it more, so they can make more purposeful choices about the products they're buying for good. And that connection between, that's how everyone in the world can make a bigger difference by, you know, pivoting to brands which are doing good. And there's a tension in there because not everybody's perfect, and there are challenges across this chain, right across the chain and right across all business segments. But getting that visibility, I think, is important. And you know, one of the things we're keen to advocate is transparency, traceability, and transparency to allow consumers to make choice of what's important for them. And I think that's something that, particularly in some of these complex chains of cocoa, tea, palm, coconut sugar, coconut oil, you know, these are quite complex chains, but we have to find a mechanism through technology to make the transparency and traceability fundamentally better, to allow consumers to make choice. That will drive the biggest change, and it allows everyone then to participate.
Yeah, thank you, David. That's very interesting. I mean, I think one thing that we're all, again, becoming more and more aware of is that we all have ability to influence as a consumer. You know, every time you decide to buy this product or that product or whatever, we are making choices that do ultimately have an impact. And it may be a small impact, but, you know, cumulatively and collectively, we can make a huge difference, which I think would probably be my answer to Hannah. Tansri, can I bring you in? You've been involved in advising governments in government policy making for a long time now. I mean, do you have a sense that the government is shifting its policy, that it's more responsive to the voice of to people's demand for change?
Yes, of course, Malaysia, you know very well the political fluidity of the moment. But I want to support Henry's optimistic view about the environment or biodiversity loss and climate change. Charles, you mentioned about your visit to the Raja Muda Musa Forest Reserve. I think nearby, we must have heard of the Kuala Langat Forest Reserve, which is under threat. The Selangor government wanted to de-gazette a large chunk of it for housing, for commercial purposes. And the Orang Asli, the NGOs have been fighting for it for a long time. But this is the power of public opinion. You remember, I recall last month, November 11 or November 3rd, never happened before. It was not really reported by the papers except the Star. When all the parties in the Selangor Legislative Assembly unanimously voted to have that Kuala Langat Forest Reserve maintained. Can you believe that in Malaysian Parliament, everyone, they never agree on things, but on this count, they do. The only constraint, Charles, there is a small note there. Eventually, the state exco would decide. That I have no guarantee, But I think the power of public opinion, Henry, it means a lot, for all the parties to agree, unanimously. Wow, that's my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Tansri, and very, very heartening, heartening to hear that. And I think Julian, I'm very, very conscious that we didn't really answer any of your very, very good questions about how we pay for the nature-based solutions. I mean, your questions deserve a whole webinar and more probably on their own. So we'll think about how we come back to answer you. But I think one of the important things is the work that the WWF has been doing in putting an economic value on these assets. Something that I think 5-10 years ago we just didn't really think about them in that way. But now we're increasingly aware of just how incredibly valuable they are. Henry, do you want to come in for just
yes,
30 seconds on that?
Right.
Because we need to finish in a minute.
Right. Julian's question about who is going to pay for it. I'm very happy to inform you that the European Union Development Program is coming up with a new 7-year program. And they have allocated 70 billion euro, for the development. And 75% of that 70 billion euro will be determined by the non-European countries. So the European delegations are having consultations. In fact, this afternoon, they are having a bilateral discussion with us in Malaysia. So, everybody is coming together, putting the pool of money together to support this agenda. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Henry. I mean, yes, you're absolutely right to point to the huge contribution of the EU, and that neatly segues us into the final element of our webinar, which is a short video, which is advertising the UK government's commitment in the Pledge for Nature that we've just been watching the video on. So please, let's have the final video of the session.
The government has made 10 commitments in its Leaders' Pledge for Nature. We will ensure the recovery from COVID-19 is green and fair. Agree ambitious global biodiversity targets backed by science. Address climate change, biodiversity loss and other environmental crises as one. Transition to sustainable patterns of production and consumption. Align our climate policies with the Paris Agreement. End environmental crimes like the illegal wildlife trade. Represent biodiversity across all key sectors and policies. Recognise the link between health and the environment. Embed nature into economic decision-making. Engage the whole of society and science in our policies. This is the Leaders' Pledge for Nature. What's yours?
Well, thank you very much again to all of our participants. I think that's been a really interesting discussion about some fundamentally important issues. And that brings us to the end of this session, which is, let me remind people, the launch session of the British High Commission Malaysian Nature Tour. And I do encourage people who are watching, firstly, thank you very much for taking part. Thank you for your questions. And please do get involved and take part in the rest of our day of webinars and other events. Thank you all very much indeed.
Nora, you're on mute, Nora.
Many apologies. Didn't realize I was on mute. Once again, thank you so much, His Excellency Charles Hay, and also the other fellow panelists, Tan Sri Professor Zachary Abdul Hamid, Dr. Henry Chan, David Ingram, and also Julian Tessera. So our next session will be on the new future for sustainable land use mechanism and also nature protection. So with this, I would like to end this session, and do join us for the 12 p.m. session that I just shared earlier. Once again, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you guys again soon, in person. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you
Nora.
all.
Are we going to do a photo? Did you say?
Thank you all.